Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name's Stephen Evans. I'm the Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute, and I'm pleased to welcome lots of you here this morning to talk about youth employment. So we're here to talk about youth employment, and we have two expert speakers, which I'll introduce in a moment. A couple of bits of housekeeping first. If you're on Twitter, please do tweet away using the hashtag pandemic generation and sort of make any points you wish via that and ask any questions too. We're also going to use the group chat. So if you have questions or comments or thoughts, please do put those in the group chat and respond to each other, and we'll try and pick up as many of those points as we can during the discussion as well. We've also got a couple of polls that we're hoping you'll vote on this morning as well. And if we can just bring up the first poll, please. So we're doing this via Slido. So there's two ways to access this. If we can just go back to the previous slide for a moment, please. So you can either take a photo of the QR code there with your smartphone, or you can go to slido.com where the event code is 5536, and that will take you through to the next slide, which shows the question and the options for the first poll that we're asking you to vote on. So question is, what best reflects your view about the measures to tackle youth unemployment so far? So either the government's done enough and it should all be fine, or it's been a good start but we're going to need more to happen, or we're just nowhere near enough and we're heading for big problems. So please do log on to Slido and vote via those options. The link is also in the group chat as well if you want to click directly through from there. So you've got about probably 10 to 15 minutes for that one, so please get voting. So whilst you're voting away on that, a quick bit of introduction from me. So young people were more likely to be working in the shutdown sectors that were affected by lockdown, which was over 5 months ago now. Our research shows that young people are both more likely to work in those sectors and more likely to be furloughed under the coronavirus job retention scheme. We know as well that the youth claimant count has more than doubled in the last few months. Now, the claimant count does include some people who have some income from employment, but in general, it's a good measure of those claiming unemployment-related benefits and a more timely measure than some of the other measures that we have. So there's clearly been a big increase in youth unemployment using that measure. And then young people coming out of education face a double whammy of disrupted education and a weaker labour market, and we've had the various exam results fiascos of the last couple of weeks, and many people still waiting for their BTEC results as well. So I think there's a real set of risks for young people in terms of those who've already lost their jobs and those who are exiting education and entering the labour market. And we know that unemployment whilst you're younger has a real effect on your long-term job and career prospects. So given all those challenges, I think it's good that the government has announced lots of things around extra funding for traineeships in England, extra funding to encourage employers to take on apprentices, and the Kickstart scheme, which builds on the Future Jobs Fund, and lots of other things as well. I guess for me, and I'm sure we'll go through this as Anna and Simon speak and as we go through the discussion, I think there's a question about speed. So it's 5 months since lockdown began, and we knew it was coming. So have we acted quickly enough? There's another point about, have we done everything that we should, or where are the gaps? What else should we be looking at? And then there's a third point about joining up and coherence. So have we ended up with a load of initiatives, or actually do we have something quite clear and joined up that's a clear offer for young people? So those are three of the things on my mind in particular, and I'm sure there'll be lots more that come through the discussion as well. So I'm going to move us straight on to our two speakers, and then we'll have a discussion, including points raised via the group chat as well. So first of all, I'm really pleased to introduce Anna Smee, who is the Chief Executive at the Youth Futures Foundation, and who we've been working closely with along with a wide group of other organisations to try and think through some of the policy and delivery response. So Anna, over to you.
Hello Stephen, hi everybody, very good to be here to talk about this important subject. I do have So I'm sharing slides in order to cover all the kind of technical detail and help people keep track of what I'm referring to as we go, but I will get into it more in the Q&A afterwards too. So have a go at this. Stephen, can you see that okay?
Yes, that's come up fine for me.
Fantastic, thank you. Over the last few months, so I don't need to go into this in too much detail, but just to recap, we were already experiencing an increase in youth unemployment before COVID hit, and particularly for those young, for us at Youth Futures Foundation and also for the Youth Employment Group more widely. So as you can see here, we're looking at not just the issue around shutdown sectors, but also practical things like those students in year 13 who didn't receive careers education before the summer holidays came along. And we all know that there's a lot of evidence that of the scarring effects of young people being out of work even for short periods of time. And those young people who have faced barriers to progression are more likely to be out of work for a longer period of time, which has greater scarring effect. Fantastic work being done with Leo data to understand that better. And that has long-term implications for economic growth. It's important to note the stat that PwC developed around the impact of the impacts on UK GDP if we could improve the number of young people in work aged 20 to 24 of GDP for our economy. So this is an important topic, not just in terms of young people's health and well-being, but also for all of us and for the whole economy and for our long-term economic prospects. Young people who are NEET in 2001 were 2.8 times as likely to be unemployed or economically inactive 10 years later. So this is going to have long-term implications for us if we don't act fast. We already know that the impact of COVID has been significant. It's quite frightening to see that young people are 2.5 times more likely to work in sectors that were shut down during the height of the pandemic. And that means that a large number of them have been furloughed, and we're quite likely to see significant numbers be made redundant as we hit the end of the furlough scheme in September and October. I think we need to reflect on the fact that those in education and training are not well prepared to go into the labour market. 9% have already lost their jobs when we pulled this data together, but I think that number is higher today. And the other thing we'd like to emphasise is the importance of thinking about young people who are coming through in that pipeline from all different settings. So it's often easy, the general public and the conversation in the media is often about those young people coming through these 3,500 secondary schools. But there are also hundreds of thousands of young people coming onto the employment market from FE colleges, from alternative education, through training providers. For many of those young people aged under 25, adult education will be crucial, and obviously all of the university widening participation activity. So what does good employment look like? We felt this was important to just emphasise that this isn't about simply getting a young person into any paid job. There's a risk then that they bounce in and out of work, and the scarring effects will still hit them later on in life. So the key thing here is to make sure they're in paid work, at least minimum wage, at least 16 hours a week, to think carefully about the importance of self-employment for many young people as well, to make sure that young people can access a high quality job, which is ideally a job they actually want in an industry or sector that they're particularly interested in, because there's a much greater chance then that they will stay in work. And sustainment is crucial, making sure they stay in a job for 6 to 12 months. And we are really keen to ensure that young people have access to education and training throughout, but particularly for the younger ages, those aged 16 to 18. So we need a rapid response for these at-risk groups. We need to focus not just on getting young people into work, but prevention, so making sure they're equipped to access work and we don't have young people with periods of unemployment. Quickly responding to those who do become unemployed, and then providing sustained support to make sure young people can stay in work and don't bounce in and out of low-value jobs. So what have the YEG been doing to push for action? So many of you on this call probably are involved in the YEG. Thank you very much for all your input and support. You will be aware that there have been 6 working groups taking place over the last few months to focus on some of the key areas that we felt needed to be looked at. So the first one being reducing job losses in the immediate term. Second one, providing employability support during lockdown. And the third one, ensuring quality welfare to work system post-lockdown. Particularly those first two, those teams worked really fast to get recommendations across the government as policy was being developed. The others, we've had a little bit more time, not a huge amount, to work on our thinking. So group 4, encouraging a healthy youth labour market post-lockdown. Number 5, supporting viable and quality self-employment for young people. And number 6, ensuring effective and accurate use of data. All of those working groups have now reported back their findings, and we've developed that into a single report. And it's the recommendations of that I'm going to take you through in this presentation. So in terms of our assessment of the government response so far, obviously a huge number of measures have already been announced, and that is extremely welcome. We were all really pleased to see the government take this issue seriously and to act quickly and in a meaningful way. There's a large sums of money that have been committed. So a quick summary here of the initiatives that government has already got in place. The Kickstart scheme, so 6 months employment for young people who've been out of work for some time. Some of the details of that still being worked up, so it may be interesting to discuss that in our conversation later. New funding for National Careers Service was crucial. High quality traineeships for young people, so putting in place financial incentives, £1,000 for employers who take on a young trainee. Payments for employers who hire new apprentices. As you'll know, there's a payment incentive for apprentices under 25, also a payment incentive for taking on apprentices over 25. High value courses for school and college leavers, investing in those level 2, level 3 qualifications. An expanded youth offer within JCPs. Enhanced work search support, which is really vital. It's very challenging for young people who haven't done this before to be left on their own to go and look for jobs, particularly now that everything is online and there's just an overwhelming amount of information for them to have to navigate. Expansion of the work and health programme, job finding support service, flexible support fund, and new funding for sector-based work academies, which is providing young people with a blend of work experience placement, a guaranteed interview, and job training skills and support. So what else do we feel the government needs to do now to prevent a pandemic generation? Through our working groups, we came up with a series of recommendations. The first were around creating more opportunities for young people. So you can see here that we're calling for the government to go above and beyond what's already been promised and implement an opportunity guarantee to ensure that all young people have access to high quality training, education, apprenticeships. So this means not just those young people that are already claiming benefits, but those young people that are perhaps somewhat in the grey area of unemployment. They're not officially registered because they're not claiming, but they may well be sitting at home not working. And we feel that every young person should have access to this kind of opportunity. A call for really joined up approaches between DWP, Department of Education, National Careers Service, local authorities to develop the Excellent Youth Hubs initiative that is already underway. So the Youth Employment Group has been working closely with DWP on this, and we're quite excited to see that starting to come to fruition. The Kickstart scheme should be voluntary and holistic and focus on high demand sectors. So that's important that it's not a mandatory thing that's imposed on young people, that they feel like it's a burden. It should be a fantastic opportunity that they can opt into. And there are a series of other recommendations that came out of that, which are detailed in the paper. And in light of the scale of the challenge, the need to make sure that any response it looks at systems and processes that are already in place. So for example, the dynamic purchasing system, the flexible support fund, and existing ways of commissioning VCSE organisations all need to be looked at in the round, and we need to consider whether they're fit for purpose to be able to deliver these new initiatives, and whether they complement each other and are easy to navigate for those organisations that want to be able to provide support for young people. In terms of helping employers to take on young people, an extremely important area here, and often one that's overlooked, that this is very complex for employers to navigate. We need to make it as simple as possible for them. And we also need to put concrete offers in place. So, for example, reducing hiring costs for them, focusing those new apprenticeships on unemployed young people rather than letting employers off the hook to some extent, where they can give apprenticeships to existing staff and older staff who may not benefit as much. And that's going to be controversial, but I'm going to plug here for young people getting apprenticeships. Launching a campaign around creating quality pre-employment and employment opportunities for young people underpinned by an employment charter. And promoting transparency among employers around who is at risk of redundancy. This is really important in terms of reducing discrimination. So we want to be very sure that those young people who face discrimination, possibly as a result of ethnicity or gender or social class, that doesn't happen. We want to ensure that actually redundancy is applied as it should be in a fair way across the workforce, and roles are made redundant where that role is not needed, and it's not used to target certain demographics of young people. So the third area of recommendations is around providing young people with the right information and advice. The world has got a lot more complex since people like me looked for jobs 20 or 30 years ago. And you used to be able to open a newspaper and read through the ads and see pretty quickly what you could and couldn't do and how much it was paying. These days, everything's online, which we thought would make it easier, but yeah, I'm not sure that's always the case. So super important to build on new funding for additional careers advisors, fantastic investment into National Career Service, but I think we could do more. Working with employers to put employability support in place for young people who are at risk of being made redundant, and helping young people to overcome barriers that might be preventing them from accessing employability services. The next area of recommendations around self-employment. There wasn't that much mention of self-employment in the Chancellor's announcements, and this came through really strongly in lots of our conversations at the EGG, that many young people see this as a route into work, and they're excited about building a portfolio career or starting their own business. And so we feel that it would be really helpful to put some concrete support around that. So greater financial support for entrepreneurship via some kind of central information portal, making sure that Job Centre Plus support can accommodate those young people who are interested in entrepreneurship, minimum income floors, introducing youth stream and training and support being available for them. Putting in place a young entrepreneur support portal, and encouraging entrepreneurship in education, where there are some fantastic programs that do this, but it's perhaps not consistently applied across all schools. Finally, building and utilising evidence of what works to support young people. So whilst this is obviously not going to be front of mind at the middle of a pandemic when we're trying to just get young people into work, it is really important for us to remember the bigger picture here, that sadly we will go through another recession at some point in the future, and any learnings that we can glean from this one will help us to tackle things better and more quickly, more effectively in the next recession. So we're calling on government to invest into evaluating what works, understanding it, and that means collecting data from the outset and ensuring that independent organisations like ours, Youth Futures Foundation, have access to the programmes that are being delivered and can do things like comparison studies, randomised controlled trials. So encouraging DWP to embrace that and to continue their investment into the DWP Data Lab, encouraging Department of Education to continue investing into LEO data and similar undertakings that the What Works network can really get involved in. Making sure that we understand what works in terms of in-work progression, as well as getting young people into work. Very much taking a test and learn approach that has young people right at the centre of creation, co-creating interventions, listening to their feedback, making sure that as we go along, we're continuously improving what we do and learning from delivery on the ground every day. And finally, around that, making sure that we can actually measure activity and progress of young people really effectively. Thank you very much. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'll go back to you, Stephen.
Great, thank you, Anna. Lots in there to unpick and unpack. And just a quick last plug for the last minute or so of the voting on the poll. So if you haven't voted yet, please do get along, so we're going to shut off the voting for that in a moment. There's lots of questions and comments and thoughts in the chat, particularly around what we do around the apprenticeship levy and the apprenticeship system. And there's a point around T levels as well. I think one of the things that particularly concerns me is about 16 and 17-year-olds, where they're not entitled to benefits, and most young people that age are in education, but those who aren't, the NEET rates are relatively low. But those who aren't in education tend to be, really sort of hit quite hard and disadvantaged. And we don't even know where half of those 16 and 17-year-olds who aren't in education are. So I'm kind of quite worried about those. Are T levels really going to work in the autumn, given that they require a lengthy placement, and social distancing is limiting that, and the recession is limiting employers' capacity. So I think there's lots of questions that we can and will pick up. So if we can just show close off the voting and show the result of that first poll now, please. So there you go. So literally nobody thinks that we're pretty much sorted, done everything we need to, no worries, sit back and relax. So I'm frankly quite pleased about that. Not pleased that that's the result, but pleased that nobody thinks we're sort of mission accomplished. And then a fairly even split between the other two options, but more people saying we've done some good stuff so far, but lots of further action needed. And I think that tallies a bit with what Anna was saying about initiatives so far. So can we, we've got a second poll, which we're going to ask you now to vote on ahead of, I'm going to introduce Simon to speak in a moment, which is if we've broadly agreed that we haven't done enough so far, what else do we need to do? So you can see some options to vote on here. Clearly this doesn't cover everything, but we couldn't have 150 options to vote on, so we've picked these ones. Please do suggest any other options in the chat as well that we haven't thought about here, but please get voting away on that poll. Whilst you're doing that, I'm now going to introduce our second speaker, and then we'll get into some discussion. Our second speaker is Simon Ashworth, who is the Chief Policy Officer at the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, and I'm sure we'll be picking up some of those discussions about apprenticeships and traineeships and lots of other stuff around that as well. So Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen, and morning, everyone. And I think there were two things that really resonated that you did in your intro, Stephen, about the need for speed and the need for coherency between some of these initiatives, and they're definitely some of the things that I'll touch on during my my talk over the next 5 to 10 minutes. So just want to recap on the run up to the Chancellor's economic statement and the new plan for jobs. So, prior to that, we had the Prime Minister making a very sort of bold statement around an apprenticeship guarantee for young people, which was extremely well received. But in essence, we saw a watering down of that, and the language shifted. And as Anna talked about, the move to a broader and wider opportunity guarantee for young people. So moving away from an apprenticeship, which is obviously a job with a training program attached, to actually allowing young people a basket of opportunities if the employment opportunities don't exist. But before getting into the detail of the plan for jobs and some of the plus points and some of the challenges, what I would say is that the actual commitment from the government and the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, it was fantastic to see that FE was centre stage as part of the government's response to the bounce back, and the talk around the role of apprenticeships and the role of traineeships as well, a really important programme that has been plugging away, and the numbers have been reducing over the last few years. But actually, the outcomes on traineeships have been fantastic, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But really key that and positive to see that apprenticeships and traineeships are front and centre as part of the government's response. But I'll explore those in a bit more detail around do they go far enough, or what are we picking up so far in terms of some of the trends that we're seeing around some of the apprenticeships, certainly, and some of the things around Kickstarter. So just starting with apprenticeships, there were a couple of items that were in the mix in the run-up to the economic statement in the guise of a potential wage subsidy that was certainly talked about. And alongside a sort of wage subsidy was the view around an economic incentive stimulus for employers. Unfortunately, the wage subsidy aspect didn't make it into the plan for jobs, and I think seems to be sort of feedback from the Treasury that they were concerned about value for money. So certainly on apprenticeships, there was the new commitment around incentive grants to employers to try and stimulate and hire new apprentices of all age. So just on the programme itself, a 6-month programme supplementing existing employer incentives aimed at new hire apprentices, so not upskilling existing employees. So certainly looking at the data that the DfE published during sort of COVID, what starts that were taking place were predominantly in larger employers, existing employees on high level programs, and where we saw the biggest decline was new hire starts, young people, and certainly lower entry level entry route programs at level 2 and level 3. So certainly the government recognised that they need to do something to stimulate not just starts, but the types of start that were taking place. So we've got a 6-month period for the apprenticeship incentive payments, an incentive grant for 16 to 24-year-olds, and a new grant for 25 plus, which is quite surprising. So the first time we've had an incentive for adults. What I would say, and thinking, looking at the incentives, are the incentives enough in terms of the gaps between the ages? When you add in the existing incentive payments, you're looking at a £3,000 payment for an employer to take on a 16 to 18-year-old, a £2,000 for a 19 to 24, and a £1,500 for a 25 plus adult. So actually, is the variation between those categories enough to drive the right outcomes? In terms of sort of volumes, the Treasury sort of budgeted for 100,000 of those incentive payments. So quite a significant number, probably looking at 150 to 200 million pounds, which actually pales into significance somewhat when you look at the £2 billion commitment to Kickstart. But certainly what I would say is we were talking to a group of levy-paying employers early last week, getting feedback from them on how they find the incentives, and will that make a difference for them to taking on new hires. And what I would say, certainly the feedback we've had so far from the private sector is that the incentives, although they're welcome, they're not actually a deciding factor. So certainly for larger employers, the impact has been probably negligible. We have seen much more interest from non-levy paying employers and SMEs looking to utilise those grants, so probably targeting the right end of the market. But in essence, what I would say is that in Alp's view, to make a real difference, we probably needed to have something along the lines of a 50% subsidy, whether that was a wage subsidy or an employer incentive of a young person's salary, to really get the traction that we need. So it was a positive first step, some early positive signs to certainly stimulate the SMEs and the young people, but will it go far enough? So out of the black box, a reasonable starting point, but does it go far enough? In terms of traineeships, we saw a significant revamp, reform, boosted traineeship programme, £111 million. Traineeship's a fantastic programme. It's been around since 2013. The programme outcomes have been really strong. So it's a good programme that bridges the employment and skills spectrum. So I think one of the misconceptions is that traineeships is just a pre-apprenticeship programme, but actually it's been an effective programme to get people jobs, apprenticeships, and further education. With the programme itself, we've got more flexibility, so learners with a prior level 3 can do traineeships. So it's been opened up to a wider audience, and tripling the numbers, and a new £1,000 incentive grant for employers to take on a work placement. So all positive things, tripling numbers. I think the biggest challenge around traineeships, going back to one of Stephen's points, is about speed. So the DfE recognised that in order to triple the number of traineeship places, they need to open up the traineeship market to more providers. We're only just about to hit a procurement, which will probably last for at least 8 weeks. So the extra capacity to get providers into the market to help deliver those places, is not going to land until probably November time. So we've got a challenge at the moment with young people. So speed of the essence, and I think traineeships has certainly been a good strong response. But speed really of getting that program off, get kind of money into the system and get it going quickly is a key aspect. I just want to talk about Kickstart as well. So the Kickstart program, the £2 billion commitment from the government, and really the sort of flagship of the economic statement. What I would say certainly from ALP's perspective is that the jury's out on Kickstarter. I think everyone was very excited when the scheme was announced. People could see how it could link with other programs, with apprenticeships and other programs. We've had very little detail has come out about the scheme. There was talk about it starting in August, and employers been able to register an interest, and the first participants from September. Again, it seems that the devil's in the detail, and again, a program that could be delayed potentially back into sort of October, November. So again, speed and the underpinning detail. I think one of the big challenges around Kickstart is it's clearly been designed in isolation by the DWP and the Treasury, and it kind of knits back to what Stephen was saying around the importance of having a coherent skills approach that sort of bridges across employment and skills programs between DWP and DfE. And probably one of our main concerns really about the Kickstarter is that will it displace opportunities on traineeships and apprenticeships? And the two real kind of key points on the Kickstarter are the referrals from the Job Centre Plus and the Job Centre Plus work coaches. Who will they be referring to the programme? Which programmes will they refer to? Yeah, you've got different buckets for the programmes about those who are most furthest from the market, those who are job ready, but also the behaviour of employers as well. Do they want? Will the incentives be enough? Will they be willing to take someone on a shorter work placement for traineeships, or are they happy just to take someone on what is in essence a subsidised work placement on the Kickstart scheme? So I think the Kickstart scheme's got great potential. I think moving forward, if it had better alignment with apprenticeships, it would there'd certainly be much more of a coherent approach rather than operating in isolation. So the jury's out. We're waiting more information on the Kickstart scheme, but a significant commitment from government, the £2 billion compared to the programs. And then just to kind of finish off, what else do we need? We've had as I said at the start, we've had a positive step, positive first move, but actually, what do we need to look at and refine that hasn't been included, or we need to adjust moving forward? So probably three things I'd throw into the mix are the economic statement was very much around a plan for jobs, getting people into the workplace. We've seen very little support outside the job retention scheme. Certainly for young people on apprenticeships who are probably most at risk of becoming made redundant and being displaced as the job retention scheme comes to an end. So, do there need to be a flexible furlough extension for redundant or young people at risk of redundancy on apprenticeship programs to retain them in their apprenticeship program? And that could also be some form of sort of wage subsidy if they've been on the job retention scheme before. So that could be something the government could look to bring in for people under the age of 24 who are already employed, and let's kind of keep them in employment as the job retention scheme winds down. I think the incentive payments, I think they're positive. I think six months is a very sort of short-term period. The government is obviously expecting a bounce back recession recovery. So 6 months of getting people into jobs who are job ready, and when those 6 months have kind of washed through, they're expecting participants coming off traineeships and off the Kickstarter scheme to then come into the job market. And actually, in 6 months' time, will the job market have recovered, and do we need some extended incentives for under 24s to help them make that transition from traineeships and Kickstarter into apprenticeships? And then the kind of final what else from me is, and I touched on this again, it goes back to what Stephen was saying, is it's really, really critical that we need a coherent rather than a conflicting approach between certainly the Kickstarter scheme and apprenticeships, and a more coherent approach between DFE and DWP. That has always been the pot of gold under the rainbow about having a coherent approach to integrated employability and skills. But for me, they're probably three things that you know, are lacking, or areas of refinement that we could see, hopefully, through the comprehensive spending review, or some of the short-term measures that the government could look to put in place to supplement what we've already got. So, Stephen, that's quick whistle-stop tour, and I'll hand back to you.
Great, thanks, Simon. And I should say, some of the things that we've been talking about so far are UK-wide. Other things, particularly on the education side, obviously, are England only. And then some things are GB, and then there's kind of everything in between. So I think it's also worth reflecting on what else is going on across the UK. And I think the Welsh Government's got some really interesting work that it's doing. We've evaluated its traineeship scheme, and it definitely works. And they've got their own employment programme in addition to the DWP's work and health programme, and that allows them a bit more flexibility, perhaps. So we might pick up some of those other examples. There's so much discussion going on in the group chats that is quite difficult to keep up with. And so please do keep making those points and having that discussion there. I'm going to try and pick up some of those points now in the discussion. And I think perhaps sort of a couple of questions for both you, Simon, and Anna to respond to. I guess what I've kind of picked up from what you've said, and also what's coming through on the chat, and what I said at the start, I'm really worried about the pace of response. And Simon, you were saying that at some point soon we might launch an 8-week procurement for traineeships, and then it'll probably take a bit longer than 8 weeks, because it always takes longer than you think. Speaking as an ex-commissioner, and then it takes a few weeks to get up and running. So, and then Kickstart, I understand there should be some guidance in, possibly even this week, but certainly imminently. But then, as I think somebody pointed out in the chat, potentially not the first referrals to that till end of October or November. So are we already too late to avoid a big spike in needs? Or is there still time to avoid that, or a sort of damage limitation? And secondly, so I said at the start, I'm quite worried that we've got a range of initiatives and not a coherent offer, and that point's come through in the group chat as well, and how that works for different groups of young people as well. Because I've said young people like it's one group, but I slightly worry that each, you know, I think Simon, you said DFE and DWP are kind of doing some of their initiatives in isolation. I slightly worry that policy teams within departments have each got their own set of initiatives. So how does that add up to a coherent offer, the opportunity guarantee, as Anna said, or whatever you want to call it, for young people, but also for employers? There's been people mentioning in the group chat, employers are struggling at the moment. There's a pandemic on, there's a recession on, and do you want T-level placements, school work placements, work trials, sector-based work academies, T-level placements, apprenticeships, kicks, you know, the list goes on. What do you actually want us to do? So to condense that down, my ramble, two questions. One is, are we too late to avoid a big spike in needs, or are we kind of okay, or is there stuff we can do? And then secondly, how do we get a coherent offer for young people and for employers? So Anna, if I start with you and then move on to Simon.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think very good points. Gosh, the are we too late question. I mean, this is one of those gazing into a crystal ball ones, isn't it? And you know, I suppose I've been the harbinger of doom and gloom for the last 6 months, warning everybody that this is going to be horrendous. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and it's sunny, and I think, gosh, maybe I've been overplaying it and everything will be fine after all. But yeah, I think the reality is probably that we will be too late for some young people. Yes, I think it's inevitable we're going to see a bit of a spike. I find it hard to imagine that we will avoid that, given the combination of events. And I think a lot of people, because of lockdown, have been slightly removed from the reality and able to kind of be in a bit of a bubble with their close friends and family and avoid the magnitude of the problem that is slowly creeping up on us. It's a bit like the frog in the hot water. You know, if you start in the cold water, you slowly boil it, they don't realise, but if you drop them into the hot water, they jump straight out. I feel like COVID is a bit like that, where the pan is slowly boiling and we're all just kind of swimming around and thinking it'll be fine. So I think we do need to move faster. I think at the same time, we've got to acknowledge that the size of the job for government is just huge, and they're fighting on all fronts. So whilst for us, this is a top priority area, they're obviously also fighting on the health front and the education system, and housing and unemployment and homelessness. And there are so many big priorities right now. I think at a time like this, we need a government which has a very clear strategic direction and a way of managing departments from the top down to some extent, as well as listening to what's happening in local areas on the ground. You need to be able to do that top down, bottom up, and bring those two things together, which is a skill in itself. So I think sometimes my team are out having conversations on the ground to see what's happening in places like Greater Manchester or the Midlands or the northeast of England, and we're hearing slightly different things from those staff in JCPs to what we're hearing when we talk to senior staff in DWP. And in any huge organisation, that is going to happen up to a point, but I think it shows that there is such a need for national frameworks and consistent approaches that can be easily communicated right down to grassroots level and picked up and used like a cheat sheet. So one of the things we've looked at doing for youth hubs, for example, is pulling together a kind of quick summary of what we know good looks like in terms of co-locating employment services with youth or community provision. And we're working with DWP to see if we could push that out to the grassroots to just help them in any way we can to speed up that process, because some job centres are absolutely excellent at this stuff already. They've done it before. There's been trials of places like Norfolk, been hugely effective, and others have never experienced anything like this, or they might be a relatively new leader in that particular job centre, and they're having to do this from scratch whilst also dealing with all the other stuff that's going on. So the more we, as all of us across the youth employment ecosystem, I think everybody on this call can sort of step forward and help, the better. That would be my rallying cry. In terms of making it more joined up for employers and those of us delivering training in the sector, yes, I think anything we can do to simplify things. It was quite an interesting exercise for me even writing these slides, because you can see the amount of content there is. If those of us who are doing this 24/7 are finding it difficult to get our heads around what's going on, if I was an SME right now, I would just be completely overwhelmed. So I think we probably need to segment it down and say, right, if you're a small organisation that's never hired any staff, this is probably the one policy that's most important to you. If you've got sort of 5 to 15 staff, you should be looking at these policies. If you're a medium-sized business, here are the things that are interesting for you. And it needs to be very, very easy and simple to access. And I know, having run my own business some years back, and we only had 8 staff, that even just sorting out your payroll and your national insurance contributions and things is hugely time consuming. So if you were to have asked me then, would I take on a trainee or would I take on someone through Kickstart, that probably would have been the thing that tipped me over the edge. It's got to be really, really simple for them. And I think government is aware of this. There are already really good conversations going on about how can we make sure the funding for Kickstart gets to those SMEs. So having intermediaries to help make that happen, I think will be crucial.
I think picking up on the speed point, obviously some of this provision already exists. So obviously apprenticeship provision, traineeship provision is a fantastic core of providers who've been delivering the programme. So this is about additionality. Kind of, I guess what the concern is it's a very different year. So it's not like young people who've left school at the end of June. Some a lot of young people have not been doing anything since well before that. So several number of months before we'll probably get some volume and traction in terms of things like the traineeship program, like you mentioned, the Kickstarter. So we're probably at a tipping point where actually the most disadvantaged will probably be the ones who will suffer the most, and the ones who are more job ready will probably have been supported on a traineeship or gone on to an apprenticeship in the autumn. So I think it's important to recognise there is some capacity in the system, and it's topping up. I mean, some of the areas haven't been particularly helpful. So, for example, on the traineeships and the incentive payments, they only kind of kick in from September. So potentially that will limit employers' behaviour. So employers will say, actually, we don't want to take someone on placement yet. We want to wait till September to get that. So some of that might have stymied employer participation, similar with the incentive payments. So I'd say speed is important. It's not like we're going from a standing start. There is some provision out there. It's about how do we have provision for everybody. I think that the comments around coherent and consistent, you can see how the government has sort of segmented the individuals. So, you know, they said if you're most disadvantaged, you need to go onto the Kickstarter scheme. If you're nearly job ready and you need a bit of fine tuning and support, go onto a traineeship. And if you are job ready, go onto the apprenticeship route. So, you know, that's clearly how the government has segmented and tried to have a coherent approach around the individual. But actually, like I said, it goes back to the pinch points around who the Job Centre Plus refers to what programs, and ultimately employers' behaviour. So, you know, are employers willing to take someone, invest in them, put them on an apprenticeship, or you know, take someone on a 6-month paid placement on a Kickstarter, and you know, have they got any intention to employ that person after that? So you can see how the government have approached that in terms of the individual, but you know, they haven't really thought about it in terms of the employer aspect and how those compete and contrast. So someone asked me recently what would be the best outcome for the Kickstarter program, and I said, actually, hopefully it's underutilized. At the end of the day, it is a very expensive program, and we would prefer, you know, a lot more young people to go into an apprenticeship, because ultimately an apprenticeship is a job. And so I still think there's time for the government to look at the Kickstarter scheme. So we had the sort of headlines that came out about the program. You know, the detail hasn't come out yet. You know, there's still an opportunity to look at the Kickstarter scheme and how it can dovetail rather than compete with some of the other offers that are out there at the moment.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I hope if it is underutilised, that's because young people are all doing something excellent elsewhere, rather than just it's complicated and late. So things get underutilised for all kinds of reasons. So I think that's part of why we need to have effective evaluation and monitoring of all these things Anna was saying at the start. I wanted to pick up a point that's come through a number of times in the group chat about, you know, we've talked about the government, by which we generally mean the UK government in this context, but about the role of local authorities. So I'm on the Greater Manchester Employment and Skills panel, which is trying to look at how you join these things up locally. But also a point that a number of people have made, I think James made in the group chat, about whether things like intermediaries and employer groups and chambers can also help to join things up a bit on the employer side. So I guess kind of thoughts about the sort of role of national versus local, whatever we mean by national. And then also, I guess I sort of slightly blithely said at the start that I didn't think, or I suggested that possibly the employer incentives for apprenticeships won't be enough, because I reflect back on the last recession where we had this, I can't remember the exact level, but we had incentives for apprenticeships amongst other things, and the take up was relatively low. And I think the general impression was that it's not enough to tip the balance as to whether you need another member of staff and whether that member of staff should be an apprentice. Is it just a leading question? Are those incentives for apprenticeships just way too small and not going to make a difference? And then also, secondly, what's that sort of role of local government and sort of intermediaries like chambers? So Simon, should we start with you this time?
So on the incentives, kind of as I kind of said earlier, you know, we thought that you really need to be looking at the equivalent to 50% of somebody's salary. So, you know, when you tot it up for a young person, it's either 2 or 3 grand for the incentive payments. You know, we were looking probably more at, when you look at the apprenticeship minimum wage, probably 5,000 or 6,000 per apprentice from what employers told us to really get that traction. So I think the incentives are helpful, but certainly for large employers, they were saying it makes no real difference to them in the decision-making process. But for certainly smaller employers and SMEs, it does. But actually, if the incentives were higher and maybe more targeted at younger apprentices, we'd probably get more effectiveness and more traction. So that'd be my take on the incentives. Is they were good, but don't go far enough. In terms of the roles of the local authorities and intermediaries, I mean, we've seen some really sort of positive approaches by some of the mayoral combined authorities. You look at the MCA in Tees Valley providing additional funding for wages for new hire apprentices themselves, and also sort of similar schemes in Liverpool City region around supporting redundant apprentices and incentive grants and topping up those national programs. So some of the regional areas certainly recognise that to make the difference, they need to contribute a bit as well. So that kind of links back to your first question around, are the incentives enough? And like you say, the role of sort of local and national is certainly in the local area. It's those intermediaries help demystify, what are the schemes, what are the options, what do they mean? I mean, we've had quite a lot of employers contact us quite excited about the Kickstart scheme, but actually they've completely misconstrued what it's about and are they in it for the right reason? And then we've had people referring to Kickstart apprenticeships, and actually they're two separate schemes. So yeah, I mean, it is a myriad in a maze, and I mean, it's our job to kind of pick through that, but certainly from employers, just demystifying what programs are out there, what's best for their business. Certainly there is a role for local and regional organisations to help incentivise and help demystify that. I'd certainly support that notion.
Thanks. And Anna, your thoughts on those points, and there's the kind of linked point which has come through a couple of times in the chat, and Deborah's made as well, about where are the jobs going to come from, and a couple of grand doesn't mean that you sort of magically need an extra member of staff. So kind of thoughts on those sorts of points.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's also conversation on the chat about mapping job sites so we understand where they are and know what to train young people in. And I think that links very strongly back to this local and regional point, actually, that it's the LEPs and the local authorities and the combined authorities, mayoral areas, that will know best where there are strong employment opportunities in their regions, either today or coming up tomorrow. So, for example, I was having a conversation yesterday about the situation in Swindon, where Nissan are obviously closing down their factory, and there's a possibility that Amazon might be coming into Swindon instead. Now, that kind of knowledge and the awareness there could be thousands of jobs being created is really crucial, and making sure that all the local young people in that area and those providing training support to them, the JCPs, are aware of those opportunities and know where to encourage young people to acquire new skills is really, really important. Should we be getting them to develop skills to become pickers and packers or delivery drivers? And that will depend whether you're near a UPS depot or near to an Amazon factory. So I think that is really, really important. And I think we need a national picture as well about where jobs have been created and what skills are needed. And we need a better understanding of which jobs you can do remotely, which is a new thing that's changing as a result of COVID. So in the past, it would be very unusual to take an entry-level job remotely, unless you're in kind of like niche professional area. Whereas increasingly, I think that may become possible. I think it's one of the interesting things about democratization of roles, that why couldn't you be sat in Barnsley as a young person and working for an organisation that's operating out of London, or indeed out of Paris or New York or Shanghai, all starting to become a possibility, which just looked totally unrealistic even 6 months ago. So I think we need to know more about that, and that again talks to this point about understanding global, national and local, and marrying the two things together. Otherwise you only have one part of the picture. Yeah, that would be my thought on that.
Great, thanks Anna. I think that's a really good illustration of a sort of a pre-existing trend towards opportunities for remote working that's just been fast forwarded by years and years and years in the last six months or so. And I guess a phrase that I often use, I picked up, I can't remember who originally said it, but I think is helpful, that kind of talent is equally distributed through this country, but opportunity isn't. And so we've had lots of discussion about, does that mean that young people and others have just got to move to where the opportunity is, or how do we move the opportunity to young people? And then that's proved difficult. Various governments have tried levelling up for about the last century, but actually the kind of remote working potentially finds a new way for us to do some of that.
Just briefly on the apprenticeship point, I think as well, it's important to understand that it is about more than just finances, which I think both you and Simon have alluded to. But for us, even the Youth Futures Foundation, we're a small organisation, we'd like to take on apprentices. It's hugely complex to understand which organisations could provide those apprentices, but also then which can provide the training. So you're looking to find multiple organisations partner with, and so 2 apprentices. And I think that is a big deterrent for SMEs. It's not just about the cash, it's about the man hours and the time that it will take for their staff to understand and unpick all of that and put all the systems and processes in place. So anything we can do to streamline that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really important point. We're coming towards the end, so I'm going to ask if we can put up the results of the second poll that we ran, please. Let's see what you all voted. I know a few people said in the chat they wanted to vote for more than one. I kind of wanted to vote for all 4 of these and then another 5, I think. But so we kind of got, well, a clear majority there, arguing for more investment in employment support, but also creating job opportunities as well. So kind of where's the jobs going to come from? And then a bit of an even split between more information, advice and guidance and more investment in apprenticeships. And then a less popular delaying entry to the labour market. I think we will definitely get higher staying on rates, and actually it's somewhat ironic that the Education Secretary, having announced that he was going to abolish a target, which I'm not sure was actually had been in place for 10 years, to get more young people into higher education, probably is now going to get closer to hitting it as a result of the changes that we've seen to A-level results and then creating more higher education places. But anyway, as a topic for another webinar that we should do at some point. So I think we're going to have to draw it to a close, I think, but I'm going to give Simon and Anna just a last chance to either pick out one quick change, or quickly pick out one change rather, that you think we really ought to focus on, or one point that we kind of, there's been so much going on in the group chat, so I think we've picked up some of those issues as we've gone along, but if there's one point you wanted to pick out from there that we haven't covered so far. So Simon, if I start with you and then across to Anna.
Just going back to, we've been focusing on opportunities, new opportunities. We're really concerned about supporting young people who are already employed, certainly in an apprenticeship, who are at grave risk of becoming displaced. Fantastic efforts gone to get them into a job, to train them up for 2, 3, 4 years, and actually become displaced and back into the labour market. So yes, we had a plan for jobs, but hopefully the spending review will be a sort of plan for skills, but certainly more support and consideration, whether that's an extension to furlough or wage subsidies for at-risk young people on apprenticeships, would be something that we think that's missing, that would like to throw into the mix.
Thanks, Simon. Over to you, Anna.
Yeah, I mean, the chat has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you, everybody, for commenting. I'm busily trying to read that at the same time, and I'll read it after we finish the call so that I can respond more fully. In terms of one big thing, I think it is the coordination point, actually. For me, it would be fantastic if someone in central government had a clear view of exactly what's happening across all different departments and an understanding of how that's playing out on the ground for young people and all of us who work to support that ecosystem. This has to be strategic. It has to be from the top. There needs to be a plan, and then that plan will give freedom to people on the ground to go and interpret it as they wish to suit the needs of their local area. But without a blueprint to work within, it leaves people in confusion, and I think makes their lives very difficult.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to. I could have talked about this all day, as I think everybody could have, but you'll be glad to know that I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to draw us to a close here. I think there's a huge challenge, and we've kind of articulated some of that as we've gone through. We had some pretty big challenges in the dim and distant past, called February, before this pandemic hit, and we kind of can't forget about some of those as well. But actually, there is loads that we can do, and there are lots of building blocks, and there's always more and quicker and difference that we'll all argue for. But what can we do with what we've got? And I think the fact we've had so many people dial into this, and we've had such engagement and debate via the group chat and the poll and the discussion as well, shows how many people care about this, and shows how many people know about this and want to make a difference. And that encourages me. So I think we can make a difference, and hopefully we will make a difference. So just a massive thank you from me to both Anna and to Simon for taking part this morning and sharing their expertise and the discussion. And a huge thanks to everybody who's dialed in and for all of the engagement on the chats, which I've tried to keep up with and bring in as many of the points raised as possible. But I'm going to have another thorough read through, like Anna said she was going to a moment ago. There's such engagement there, and I think the challenge for all of us is how do we harness that and work together and make a difference for all young people across the country. So we're up for doing that, and I know you